unfortunately, since checking the notes and everything was in order last night and making sure everything was okay this morning, the government has made its announcement on response to the consultation, and so it's now called Carbon Reduction Commitment and Energy Efficiency. So I've had a quick introduction to it through my colleagues who've read it and tried to point me in the right direction. So as we go through the presentation this morning, I'll try to point out where things have changed. So what we're going to do is, first of all, what is a carbon reduction commitment and what it's aimed at? Who's going to be covered by it? It's 20,000 organisations are going to be affected and have to make some sort of information disclosure, and 5,000 organisations are going to have to participate fully. And so we're going to look at what those 5,000 organisations are going to need to do. Obviously, with something like this, there's risks and opportunities, and so we're going to look at the financial and reputational risks, and then look at what does your organisation need to do now. The carbon reductions commitment itself starts in 2010 in April, but you need to start preparing data for it at this moment in time. So it's a mandatory emissions trading scheme that will cover non-energy intensive companies in the UK. So anything from local councils, commercial establishments such as banks, supermarkets, all those organisations that aren't energy intensive but still have a reasonable amount of energy usage. And they'll be required to measure, monitor and report on emissions from the energy that's used in their buildings, energy, gas, etc. But it doesn't include travel energy usage. Organisations will have to buy allowances from government each year, and this is to cover the amount of carbon that they're going to emit, and then they'll have to submit and surrender these allowances at the end of the year. All the revenue from the sale of the allowances will be recycled back to participants, so it should be revenue neutral to the government. And the reputational risk comes from your performance will be published in a league table at the end of each year, and so those organisations that perform well will come out at the top of the table, and those that perform less well, the laggards, will be at the bottom of the table. So the scheme is expected to start in April 2010, and we've got a 3-year introductory period where the allowances will be sold for a fixed price, and that's at this moment in time is going for £12 per tonne. And then going forward, there'll be a reduction in emissions, the capped phase, and the aim of this piece of legislation is to get a 1.2 million tonne of carbon reduction by 2020 based on business as usual. So this is quite an important part of the government's legislation to go to a low carbon economy. So we've got the start date of April 2010, but as I said before, you shouldn't start until then to start looking at data, etc. You need to be starting to look at the issues now. So who's covered by the carbon reduction commitment and what does it mean? For the introductory phase, to decide whether you qualify or not, this is going to be the 2008 calendar year. And to qualify, you need to have at least one half-hourly metre settled on the half-hourly electricity market. So those organisations that have got one of those are typically going to know, because they're going to get information coming through each month on that electricity data. Once you've decided whether you've got one of those meters or not, then you've got to look at all the electricity half-hourly meters for your estate and decide whether you've got more than 6,000 megawatt hours of electricity coming through those meters or not. At the moment, the Environment Agency is currently sending out information to each billing address for the electricity meters to say that they're a half-hourly meter and to say how much electricity they have consumed through that meter. Now, if you're working in head office and not all your billing information comes through separately, this piece of information might be coming out to individual sites, so you need to make those sites aware of that so that you can collect the information centrally. And the information disclosure for qualifications takes place between April 2010 and September 2010. So for this qualification period, it is only electricity usage. And at this stage as well, you've got to determine what your organisation is. Now, when I left home this morning, the definition of an organisation was the largest parent organisation in the UK, and that had to report on the whole emissions for the company. Now, there are some changes to that going forward, and if you're a large subsidiary that qualifies for the carbon reduction commitment in your own right, then you will be able to enter into the scheme individually. But the exact details of that still need to be followed up. So that's a qualification period based on electricity only. So going forward, once you've established that you are going to be covered by the CRC, you need to work out which energy usage that your organisation is responsible for. And this is going to be energy usage where you're the counterparty to the energy supply contract. So you sign the supply contract, you have the agreement with the energy supplier. And when you go through to the full phase, it's not just the electricity consumption that counts, it's all the energy usage on your site that's used by the buildings, but again, not for transport. Now, under the scheme, there are some exemptions where you don't have to purchase allowances for. So, example, if your organisation is a more energy-intensive organisation, you might have some what called climate change agreements, and in these instances, you won't need to purchase allowances for emissions that are covered by these. But that, again, that's something you need to look at in detail for your specific organisation. And then, once the scheme starts, as the rules stood previously, you'd have your first year, you'd have your emissions from April 2010 to March 2011. Then in April 2011, you would have to have purchased 2 years worth of scheme allowances for the year that had just gone, and allowances for the forthcoming year. Now, as a result of the consultation in April 2011, you'll only have to purchase 1 year's worth of allowances, and this is because of the significant financial impact that purchasing 2 lots of allowances would have had on companies, and we'll see an example of that later on. So, where are the risks and opportunities, and what do these look like for an organisation? First of all, there's a cost implication. Each year you've got to buy these allowances at auction, and then a proportion of this cost will be surrendered back to the company. As I said before, it's revenue neutral to the government. And the recycling payment depends on a number of things. In the first year of the scheme, obviously, when you surrender your allowances, you surrender the information to government, they'll have nothing to benchmark again as to what you've done in previous years. So what they have for the first year of the scheme to determine the recycling payment is what's called the early action metric. And government's taking two different areas as indication of early action metrics and good energy management in the past. The first one is whether you've obtained the Carbon Trust standard or not, and the Carbon Trust standards looking for reduction in carbon emissions over the last 3 years. And there's also within this early action metric whether or not you've implemented additional automatic meter reading equipment on your meters. So basically, where you haven't got this half-hour electricity data, you've installed better metering equipment, and therefore you've got better information coming back to you to manage the energy used within your state going forward. And in the first year of the scheme, the recycling payment's based purely on this early action metric. So if you've done everything you can and come back to the top of the league table, then you'll get a greater amount of money recycled. And this table up here just shows what you're likely to gain or lose in the first year of the scheme. So in the first year of the scheme, the introductory phase, if you come at the top of the table, you get around 10% more than you put into it back. If you come down at the bottom of the scheme, you get 10% less. And this bonus penalty payment increases as the scheme goes forwards. So just have a quick look at what the scheme will cost in the introductory phase. If you've got total annual emissions of around 26,000 tonnes, then your cost of buying 1 lot of allowance is going to be around about £360,000. 10% of your annual energy bill. So it's quite a significant exposure and a significant amount of cost that's got to be outlaid to start off with. And you can see, based on these bonus penalty payments going forwards, in the first year, if you've got a 10% bonus or penalty, you've got around about £30,000 gain or loss, and that increases each year. So there's definitely advantage to be had from coming top of the league table. If you've done all these things, you're going to have a lower energy consumption anyway, so you're going to have lower CO2 emissions, so you're going to lessen your exposure through the amount of allowances you're going to have to buy, but also you're going to make money out of the scheme as well. Whereas if you're bottom of the table, if you haven't taken action on energy saving measures, you're going to be spending more than you need to do on energy, and also you're going to become bottom of the table. From a compliance point of view, there's a reputational risk here because somebody within the company is going to be held responsible, and over a 5-year period all companies will be audited. It is a light touch piece of legislation, but then it's still got to be audited, and there's a series of penalties that apply if you don't comply. For example, in the first year of the scheme, if you don't get all your information on time, there's a £5,000 penalty to start off with, and then for each day subsequent to that where you don't submit the information, there's a 5 pence per tonne additional charge. Now that might not seem too much money, but if you think about the example we've just had with that sort of around about 25,000 tonnes of CO2, that represents £1,000 per day each day that you don't submit your information. So that's why I keep saying it's important to start collecting the information you need now rather than leave it to the future. As I said, companies will be ranked in a league table showing what their performance is and what they've been doing, and I think most companies, where they're bothered about the reputational risk, would want to be coming top of that table. In addition to this, there's also some areas where you can just give information as to what you're doing. These won't affect your league table positioning, but I think other external companies may or may not be looking at this information. And there's just an example of them is given up here. So it's, do you do long-term carbon reporting? Do you report your savings? And have you got a director with responsibility for your carbon? What does your organisation need to do now? What do you need to do in order to prepare for the carbon reduction commitment and energy efficiency? First of all, if you haven't already rolled out automatic metering, now's the time to start looking at what source of energy you use would benefit from installing automatic metering, collecting that data so you can see where energy is being used and how you can reduce consumption. And the early action metrics based on how much of that metering you have installed by March 2011. So it seems quite a long way off, but it's not a huge amount of time to write a tender, decide what you want and get it installed. The next one's to achieve the Carbon Trust standard. Again, that only has a certain time period. Once you're accredited through the Carbon Trust standard, then you're accredited for 2 years, but you need to get all the information you need together to actually get accredited. So that's something that you should be looking at now as well if you want to become top of the league table. And it's an early stage. Start looking at how you're going to reduce your energy consumption and start to get a plan together. I think one of the last speakers was saying companies often go ahead and put in renewable energy solutions, but what they need to be doing beforehand is looking at where they can make those savings. So that's sorting out your cost and reputational risks. And compliance, what do you need to do now? First of all, define what does your organisation encompass, what emissions do you need to be reporting on, make sure you've got that together. Establish with respect to electricity which half-hourly meters are covered by your organisation within that boundary, and determine what that annual consumption is through those meters. And if it exceeds that 6,000 megawatt hour, you need to disclose that information. during the registration period. You need to go through the process of working out where all your emissions come from, and then work out how many allowances you're going to have to purchase, and you need to budget for that purchase as well. You make the purchases in April each year, and the recycling payment comes in October. That's 6 months of the year when your company is hit by this financial issue. And also, somebody's got to be responsible for the whole process, so make sure you assign responsibility by director level to manage the whole thing, through somebody from that operational level to be collecting the data and implementing. Establish what information you need to have an evidence pack. If you're going to be audited, you need to be having all the information there together and to hand, and start measuring your energy usage. And really, I think that gives an overview of where we are with the legislation at the moment and the results of the consultation this morning. So thank you.